And thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate you opening up this dialogue on someone who disagrees with you. So I'm happy that you're listening to pass the sentence. Just as like a way of background, I'm Jewish. My grandparents on my mother's side were both like in concentration camps during the Holocaust. So appreciate your rendition or talking about fascism. But I guess what I'm wondering is like if microaggressions are used as a means of suppressing ideas and debates about like, blacks, who like millions of which were enslaved in this country and involved in like a transatlantic slave trade. Do you think anti-Semitism is a claim? Do you think anti-Semitism is a claim that's used to detract from like real criticism of the state of Israel or of like other situations like that?
It can be. I mean, it depends on the criticism. So not every, as I said, not every accusation of racism is ill-founded, right? Not every accusation of anti-Semitism is ill-founded. You know, if the idea is that you disagree with a particular Israeli policy and that's anti-Semitism, not necessarily. If the idea is that you believe that in the moral conflict between Israel and its neighbors, that Israel is in the wrong and that its neighbors are in the right, then, which effectively means that you don't back the existence of the state of Israel, then that is anti-Semitism. So it depends on the nature of the claim being made. But of course, I mean, there are people who are going to claim anti-Semitism when there is none. There are going to be people who claim racism when there is none. That doesn't mean, however, that every claim of anti-Semitism or racism is false. This is actually one of the divisions that I have with some colleagues of mine, people like Milo Yiannopoulos, right? And Milo and I are friendly, but one of the things that I object to with Milo is that Milo seems to imply that anytime anyone says racist ever, or anti-Semitism ever, that that's illegitimate. And I don't think that that's correct. He says that he's just violated, so when people say things that are actually racist or actually anti-Semitic, he says, well, it's good because they're violating taboos. Well, violating taboo for the sake of violating taboo isn't always a great thing. I mean, sometimes what you're saying is actually evil, right? Sometimes you can say evil things. So the answer to your question is it depends on the claim that's being made, and I evaluate them on a case-by-case basis.
Hi, Mr. Shapiro. I'm a student at McQuaid Jesuit, which is a local Catholic school. I've gone to Catholic school all my life, so I personally haven't experienced this. But I asked one of my friends who goes to a public school, in fact, several of them, just out of curiosity, how many people pray at your school? Mm-hmm. And they told me, no one prays at our school. You can't have religion in public school. Now, I'm a high school student surrounded by many, assumably smarter people than me, but as far as I'm aware, the First Amendment says freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. So do you not agree with me that or do you believe that the public schools have not upheld the First Amendment in freedom of religion because you effectively cannot find religion, or at least the common conception is that in public schools there is no religion?
Well, the attempt to ban all religion is no better than an attempt to ban atheism in a school. I mean, I believe that freedom of religion includes freedom not to believe. But I don't believe that means that the school is obligated, for example, not to put up a Ten Commandments display, which is a part of our cultural heritage and the foundation for all Western law, or that the school can't allow people independent time to pray. I don't see a problem with that. If you don't want to pray, nobody's forcing you to pray. There's no force involved. So as long as the government is not compelling something, here's my view of the government generally. The government is a giant shooting people machine. And so because the government is a giant shooting people machine, you have to be very careful about when you use the government, because compulsion is generally not something that I like. So as long as people are not being compelled to do anything, then people can do whatever they want. If the school wants to have time for people to pray, I don't see the problem. And as long as they're not punishing people for not praying, then I really don't see the problem, obviously.
Hello, my name's Cameron. I'm also a high school student. It's nice to actually not hear you over a fire alarm.
Well, thank you all for that.
My question is, for people who understand that abortion is morally wrong,
yes,
but they don't see a reason how to stop it, they would say that, people would just go under the coat hanger abortions and women would suffer from it, so on and so forth. And you have a solution if you were to ban abortion that could affect both sides.
Well, I mean, the fact is that anytime you ban anything, there's going to be illegal activity that involves that thing. That doesn't mean that the question for pro-lifers is how many lives you're saving. And we ban murder is banned, and people kill each other all the time. So that doesn't mean that I'm going to have a solution for the woman who insists on killing her child. If she insists on killing her child, or an abortionist insists on killing her child, presumably when it comes to the abortion for pro-lifers is a criminal act and a deeply immoral one. So, I'm decisions have consequences. If you choose to act outside the bounds of morality, it is not my job to protect you from the consequences of acting outside the bounds of morality. And if you are like me and you feel that abortion is deeply immoral and indeed a grave moral evil for which the United States bears a heavy burden, then there are consequences to that. I can have sympathy for somebody's individual plight, but also have more sympathy for the idea that you don't get to kill a child because of it.
Thank you.
So you were saying that facts don't care about your feelings, and I was struck recently about how, especially with when it comes to journalism over the past 30 or so years has become a lot more partisan. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering, I was thinking back to how that, the partisan press era of the 18th century, mm-hmm. It's very similar to how it is today.
Right.
Do you agree with that? Do you think that's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing. And the reason I think it's a good thing is because I believe that everybody's view is shaped by their values. Everybody. So the idea that Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather or Sam Donaldson, these people were great objective purveyors of truth is nonsense. They were all leftists. It's just they masqueraded as objective purveyors of truth. I actually had this conversation with Sam Donaldson at one point. It didn't go well. He was at the 2012 Republican National Convention, and he was doing his radio broadcast, which is now a leftist opinion broadcast. And I went up to him, I spotted him by his eyebrows from all the way across the room. Legitimately the only man in America with heavier eyebrows than me. And I went up to him and I said, you do a leftist opinion show, did you hold these same opinions when you were a quote-unquote objective journalist? And he said, yes, I did. And I said, well then, why did you lie to everybody and claim that you were objective? And he said, what, you think you're better than me? And I said, yes, I do. So I would prefer honesty up front. I'm a conservative. I mean, if you couldn't tell, gang, I'm a conservative. And that means that if you don't believe what I'm saying, you can go check my facts and you can see whether you believe me or not. I would prefer that everybody be upfront about their biases. I think that one of the great problems with journalism, I have more of a problem, for example, with CNN than I do with MSNBC. Everybody knows MSNBC is on the left, right? They are what they are. CNN pretends at objectivity, and that's a lie. Objectivity is a lie. It doesn't exist. So, yeah, the era of partisan journalism back when the founders were around, I think is more reflective of reality than the faux consensus journalism that existed in the 50s and 60s.
Hi, thank you for coming. So my question kind of stems from your claim earlier that, especially pertaining to race, that we're all on a level playing field. I'm an economics major here, and so my question comes from my experiences here in our pretty conservative economics department, which I've loved being a part of. So you said that, it's how, and probably relating to how we're a capitalist society, but some will fall by the wayside, some will succeed, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't pertain to race, it doesn't pertain to anything. And I think that your claim that it's inherently racist to take anyone's race into account, I think that might be true in an ideal.
Above values.
Yeah, above values. I think that might be true in an ideal that we might shoot for, but I'm just not totally sure we're there yet. And I think the most important example for me, especially because markets are a really important thing, is that access to credit was very limited based on race until through the 1980s.
You're talking about redlining.
I'm talking about redlining. I'm also talking about there's redlining specifically, but in other instances. So access to credit, one of the most important things to building up wealth and attaining wealth. So if that was predicated on race, and there's only been about a generation between that, so what's this level playing field? Because
the level playing field now is if you're born now, you're an individual born now, right? You're our age, right? I'm 32. You're 32 or younger, right? So you're somebody who grew up. Really, I mean, I was 6 when the 80s ended, right? So you grew up in the 90s, 2000s. What decisions do you make that are being impacted significantly by race? What I mean by that is when you go to apply for a credit card, if you have good credit, you are going to get a credit card. If you have bad credit, you are not going to get a good credit card. The question is and then the question becomes, okay, so let's say, for example, let's take your entire premise. Let's take your premise that their parents were poor, so they're more likely to be poor, and they're more likely to have bad credit, although credit is really a reflection of the decisions that you make, you don't inherit your parents' credit. So it's really about the decisions that you make, right? So, but let's even assume the false premise that you inherit your parents' credit for some reason, that you were impacted by all of this. The problem is that the federal government then, instead of evening the playing field by saying, okay, we're going to get out of this completely, instead what the federal government does is they go overboard to the other side. So they favor race above values again the other way. What they say is, okay, now we're going to grant subprime mortgage loans, for example, to people who are undeserving buyers, right, who don't have proper credit ratings. And that, of course, results in a subprime meltdown when it turns out that people with subprime credit ratings tend to default more often, right? So the answer is that there's never an answer better than make the rules even for everyone. And the left, their solution to institutional racism, after shouting institutional racism, is always more institutional racism. It's always some sort of institutional measure designed to benefit one group above another, and it ends up being counterproductive. So that's my problem. I'm not going to look. Is there a history of racism in America? Of course. If you want to talk about actual institutional racism, Jim Crow was actual institutional racism, obviously, right? And there are institutions that were racist for literally 200 years in America. But that doesn't mean that right now, if you're going to talk about institutional racism, you have to talk to me, number one, about how racism impacts the individual now, and then what is the measure that you have for fixing that? And I don't hear that ever. I just hear somebody's poor, it must be institutional racism. So it's not practical, in other words.
Hi. Okay, so my question is, can you just do me a favor and define the terms, in your definition,
Sure.
white privilege, microaggression, and trigger warnings? Because it seems that we have very different definitions of it, and yours seem to be kind of one-dimensional and simplistic, which makes your arguments agreeable, yes, on the surface,
Yes.
but not... agreeable on the surface, yes, but not really anything more than basic.
Okay. Well, since you're already critiquing them, why don't you give me your definition? We can discuss that. That seems more productive.
No, actually, I just want to hear yours because that's how your whole. I want to know what your argument is based upon, and your definitions are what matters here, not mine. So please continue.
Okay, so I'll give mine, and then we can trade if you want, and we can have a full discussion. We often. So my definition of white privilege is that America was founded on racism, and that it is inherent in the Constitution of the United States and our legal system, and it is unremovable from the United States and our legal system. It is bound up in our economics, it's bound up in our intellectual system, it's bound up in all of the institutions that surround us. And therefore, individual failings are largely due, or group failings, if there's disparity between groups, group failings are due to these institutional biases that long predated the people who are born today, as opposed to the fault or responsibility of the individual today. Do you find that deeply wrong or unfair?
I think that's very one-dimensional, but can you please go on to microaggression? No, I'm just curious. I don't want to.
Sure. Yeah. You can label it whatever you want. I was hoping to get your definition also, so we can actually come to consensus if we could. I mean, that'd be more interesting to me. But if you want me just to define things, okay, dictionary time. Okay. So microaggressions, according to Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff in The Atlantic, are largely defined as implicit statements that we make that offend other people without even knowing it. And they're based subjectively. They're not based objectively. So I can say something to you, like if I ask you where you're from, right? You can take that as a microaggression, particularly if you're from a foreign country, because you may be thinking that I'm thinking that you are a foreigner, for example. And to me, subjectivity in interpretation is significantly less important or decent for a society in which we actually have to talk to each other than objective meanings of words and statements.
Personally, I do agree with that definition to an extent. The comment that you made about having microaggressions allow someone to put their hands on them or allow someone to act negatively or aggressively or physically, I do disagree with that because I think that's taking a jump away from what microaggressions actually mean.
So then we'll call them microaggressions. So instead, why don't you just say, that offends me?
Which is perfectly fine, but I think that what microaggressions mean, you are taking it another step outside of what the common definition is, or at least the definition that I may use. I just think that
you're right that I'm extending the logic to what campuses actually do, namely punish people for microaggressions or take measures against them. So you may agree that something's a microaggression, there shouldn't be measures against it. I'm suggesting that we come to an agreement now, you and I, that the language of microaggressions ought to go away, and instead we'll just call them subjectively offensive statements. Because that's more accurate. Microaggression implies there's something objectively aggressive about what I am saying to you if I say something to you that you don't like.
Well, I don't want to take too much time.
You know, it's interesting, so I'm glad you're here.
I will step by that one because I just for now. Next one is trigger warnings.
Okay, so trigger warnings are, again, based on the idea that I'm going to say something to you that is, what are you here? Yes.
Definition of it, because I think we have two different definitions of what all these terms
The reason that I'm finding this conversation mildly unproductive is you're not giving me your definition so we can actually reach something here. Again, I'm happy to define things until the cows come home, but what I enjoy doing is actually figuring out, if you think I'm wrong, you tell me where I'm wrong, and then we can discuss where I'm wrong or not. That seems more productive to me. Wouldn't it be more productive to you? I mean, as opposed to me just saying it?
So it would be more productive, but this is a large, it's a large number of people, and I want to speak.
We have a long line.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Time, so thank you.
Again, folks, if you want to email me, if you want to email, my email address, if you want to have these discussions in more length, is bshapiro@dailywire.com. I'm always happy to have long conversations as time permits to do these things.
Thank you.
Hi Ben, thank you for coming to this liberal state. I'm a huge fan, so I'm really glad you're here.
Oh, thank you.
So
My fan, he's here.
So I'm conservative, and like you, I'm a never Trumper, but I definitely want to vote next election. And, if Trump wins the election, I think the conservative vote should consolidate and get behind a single person so that we can show the party and the rest of America how much of us really are, that we're a force of reckoning.
Right, so you're talking about a third-party candidate if Trump wins the nomination?
Sure.
Mhm.
Should we vote for? What should we do?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a third-party candidate I find palatable, I'll vote third-party. As you say, I'm a never Trump person also. As I said on Megyn Kelly's show last week, I think that Trump is a smoking garbage heap of human debris. I legitimately think so. I'm happy to expound on that blank. But I understand this is a state where Trump is actually more popular than most other states. But in sum, you're wrong. So in any case, the idea would be that we get behind some sort of third-party candidate. Third-party candidate is going to win, but I think it's important for conservatives to draw distinctions between conservatism and the nationalist populism of Donald Trump, which has very little to do with conservatism.
Hello, Mr. Shapiro. I'm a fan. Thanks for being here. My question is about cultural relativism. It seems to me that the left really likes the idea of cultural relativism. And I know this, not from this college, by the way, but in high school. I grew up in an urban high. I went to an urban high school, Jersey City, and I was engaged in a debate with one of my teachers about Western values. I'm originally Arabic, but I accept. I think the West is the greatest civilization that's ever that human beings ever created, post-Renaissance. I think. And I was defending property rights against a more communal way. And I said, she asked me, where do your views on property rights come from? And I said, well, I have Aristotle and John Locke. And she dismissed them as dead white males right away. Two genius dead white males, doesn't matter.
Which, by the way, is absolute reductionism. Don't argue with the identity, argue with the idea. But
I know, because what if I went to my physics class and said Isaac Newton was a dead white male? We should.
Right, Albert Einstein, dead white male.
But how do you think the cultural relativism relates to their attack on free speech? I feel they're related. I can't put my finger on it.
No, I mean, it's because the idea is that diversity of values means that all values have to be treated equally, even if certain values absolutely suck. And it turns out that certain values absolutely suck. All values are not created equal. Some values are bad. Right? There are three types of diversity, and I really only covered two in this particular speech. There's diversity of thought, and there's diversity of values, which is actually different from diversity of thought. We can have a bevy of different thoughts within the rubric of freedom of speech, for example. But diversity of values about freedom of speech itself is actually not productive. If my idea is that freedom of speech is good and your idea is that freedom of speech is bad, that is actually not good for the community. And what studies have found, there's a good book by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone. And he talks in there about, he's a very far left guy, Robert Putnam, and what he said is that diversity of values actually results typically in more fragmented communities, more protest marches. The diversity is richness routine only applies where you have a common goal in mind as far as what society what the rules of society should, what freedom looks like. And diversity of values that encompasses actual values that are evil is not a worthwhile diversity. So not all diversity is worthwhile diversity. And everybody agrees with this, right? I mean, if you have a room of 3, that doesn't mean that you have to shut people up. You know, I think that the best answer to bad speech is more speech, not less speech. But there are certain values that are just evil. There are certain values that are just wrong. And the values of neo-Nazis are evil. These are evil values. And you can say them, but I'm going to call you out on it. And so the cultural relativism you see on campus, I find really disheartening, especially because the only reason that we even get to have these conversations on campus in the first place is, as you put it, because of the legacy of thoughts from dead white Western men.
How many more of these do you want to take? We have quite a line.
Well, I mean, we can go for another few.
Hey, Ben. George, Jr. here.
Okay.
So just 2 quick questions. You stated that there's 3 things that you need to do so that you don't or you can grow out of poverty in the United States, and that's
Right, you won't be in permanent poverty.
Yeah,
right.
And that is, if I recall it correctly, get a job, finish high school, and
Don't have babies out of wedlock. That's
yeah.
number 3, yeah.
And for that third one, just from a macro perspective, how do you account for the rising rates of divorce in the United States?
Well, I mean, the rising rates of divorce in the United States are largely a result of the decreasing level of religiosity in the United States is one reason. So a lot of people get married religiously and then stay married religiously, and if you don't find a religious tie that binds, then people move on. Part of it is a divorce culture that had sprung up in the 1960s that suggested that children were just fine if the parents decided to separate. Part of it is the separation in general of sex from marriage. And it used to be that sex within marriage was the norm, now it's the exception. And so if you can do sex outside of marriage, then what exactly do you need marriage for if you're a guy? Right? And the reason I say that is because the sex drives of men and women are not the same. For anybody who tells you that, anybody who tells you differently is biologically ignorant. And so, you know, there are a number of reasons why divorce rates have increased, but it's had a devastating impact on mainly women. I mean, marriage is one of the best deals that women ever got. I mean, it's a fantastic deal for women. It really is. Because it turns out that men are capable of siring children with any multiplicity of women and then abandoning the woman with the children. Marriage locked men in. It was great for women. This is why women who are married mothers are significantly better off than women who are single mothers. It turns out it's really difficult to raise a kid alone. And God, I'm sorry ladies, but it turns out God gave you the wombs. So, you know, when it came time for men to leave, they would take off and you were still stuck with the baby. Right? So that's just, again, the reality of the world. So, number of reasons why the divorce rate rose, but it's been a disaster for the United States for sure.
Hi, Ben. So, well, to give a bit of background, I'm actually not even American, so I'm from Honduras in Central America. And in general, I would consider myself pretty socially liberal, economic left. But again, I'm here mostly because I pretty much agree with several things that you said, especially like you need to know the other person's viewpoint so that you can reach an agreement. For example, you can try to reach a consensus.
Or disagree, at least clarity.
Yeah, or disagree. Yes. So, in doing that, and I also agree with the fact that there's really nothing like objectivity. So, like every medium, for example, is going to have their own bias, their own point of view.
Right.
And I think what we need to make sure is that you have just a diversity of viewpoints, so that at least someone like who wants to be informed, they can just have like
great.
They can have every viewpoint. So. In general, I like to read I'm still reading mostly liberal publications, like Vox and The Economist. And I wanted to know, and again, that more sort of the policy wonk kind of publications. And I wanted to know, like, what would you recommend, like, sort of a conservative policy wonk kind of magazine or publication?
Oh, okay. I mean, well, there's the City Journal from Manhattan Institute is very good in terms of policy on the right. Commentary Magazine writes about policy a lot. There are a number of publications. National Review obviously writes a lot about policy. My website, The Daily Wire, writes a lot about policy. So there are a lot of sources. But I mean, I agree. I think that having a wide variety of sources that you read across the political aisle, it was very useful. I read, you know, all of the main sources of the left. I think it's important, and I think that it's informative.
All right, hey, so Woodrow Wilson was pretty well regarded for being a progressive, and that's why he's a famous president. Despite that, he's also quite a bit of a racist, and that's why a lot of people in Princeton want to take his name off of buildings. So I think we all know how we feel about the reason why people want to take Wilson's name off. However, he was famous for being progressive, and that runs counter to his racism. Do you think his name should remain on the building? Part of the reason for taking it off?
Yes, I think his name should remain on the building, not because I think Woodrow Wilson was a good guy. I think Woodrow Wilson was a scumbag. Because he was a progressive and also because he was a racist. And by the way, those two are not mutually exclusive. Virtually all of the progressives of the time were also racist because they believed in Darwinian evolutionary racism. I mean, they believed in a social Darwinist view of race that was really quite gross. But the reason that I think his name should remain on the building is because I'm not in favor of obliterating history. This is how we learn who is good and who is bad. Right? If I take my kid by the Woodrow Wilson building, and my kid asks who is Woodrow Wilson, that's a good opportunity, as the left might put it, a teachable moment. Right? It's an opportunity for me to say who was Woodrow Wilson. And one of the things that I think is silly is wiping out history because some of us find it off-putting. Turns out most of history is off-putting to most people. Right? This is why whenever people say, what era would you prefer to live in? The answer is probably for 99% of people right now. Right? Because the past was not a great place. So I'm not in favor of wiping out history to spare people's sensitivities. If you don't like Woodrow Wilson, good on you. I'm with you. Now let's talk about how much you suck together.
Hello. In the long run, say 15 to 30 years, it appears that significant portions of our population will no longer have a livelihood-sustaining function in our economy because they're objectively worse at tasks than computers. Since you clearly believe in a smaller, limited government, do you believe that we should improve access to the pill, condoms, and non-abstinence-based health education to ensure that unwanted children do not result from vaginal sex? Specifically, that which is intended purely for the sake of pleasure, not reproduction? If so, what policies would you advocate for, or is my whole premise wrong?
This is very specific. Okay, so yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you for composing your thoughts. So my view of sex education is that that's something that ought to be done by the parents, not government. That's my view of it. And abstinence education doesn't work, and neither does non-abstinence education. Like, they are both virtually useless. If you look at the statistics, the reality is that the pregnancy rates and the STD rates, whether you're in an abstinence-only situation or a non-abstinence-only situation in the educational level, across the country, when you average it all out, it's almost the same. It's pretty much the same. My feeling is, obviously I'm not pro-abortion for the sake of the economy, because I don't think that you get to murder all the old people just because they're an economic draw either. Murder is not justified by economic necessity. I'm not that much of a John Stuart Mill utilitarian. But beyond that, the idea of, the answer to your question would be, if you take away government subsidies for people not being productive in the economy, they will be forced to be productive in the economy. I mean, this is why I think capitalism is a moral system and socialism is deeply immoral. Socialism is the proposition that I'm breathing and you owe me crap. And capitalism is the proposition that unless I give you something voluntarily and you take it from me voluntarily, I won't eat tonight. Right? That's the proposition of capitalism. So, I don't think that we're at risk of starvation because of overpopulation. I think we're at risk of stupid kids, and the answer is better local education, better parenting, and better behavior.
I guess my only concern with that is based off of, I obviously we've agreed that people who have two parents have better outcomes, right, and are less likely to engage in the situation because they might have that principled background that you and I are both fortunate to have, and other people might not have. So the thing that concerns me about the answer that you should leave it up to the parents is the premise already is that there isn't that parent figure there with that, or if they don't have that education because they didn't get it. Where does this start?
Right, so I can't, and the government is not capable of being anybody's parent. They're just not capable of it. We've tried it for 40 years, and that's why you've seen the rate of single motherhood in the white community skyrocket from 5% to 40%, and the rate of single motherhood in the black community skyrocket from 20 to 70 since 1960. That's what happens when you tell the government they get to be daddy. Right? The government is not capable of being daddy. Your school teachers are not capable of teaching your kids about morality. You need to be a better parent. And presenting people with the falsehood that there's going to be someone who comes in and fills that gap is just not true. And by the way, taxing me more to pay for a teacher to pay for that, here's my view. If you want me to pay for your kid, I'll adopt your kid. Okay? If you want me to pay for your kid, then I get to bring up the kid the way that I want. right? You don't get to have your cake and eat it too. You don't get to take my money and then bring up your kid badly. You don't get both. So that's my general idea.
Maybe we should give you tax credits to raise my children.
Okay, we're gonna go with 2 more questions, so I'm sorry for you guys who have been staying there for a while, but all right.
Okay. Hi, Ben. First thing I would like to say is that I completely agree with you for the most part for what all of you said over there. The thing is, you've been throwing out the word in your speech a lot. Is that the left, the left, the left?
Yes.
So I just want to ask, what's your definition of a leftist? Like, who's a leftist?
Okay, so a person who is a leftist, I sort of boiled it down in the most simplistic possible form. A leftist is someone who believes that equality of outcome matters more than equality of opportunity. Right? That's what a leftist is. Somebody who sees 2 people who are not similarly situated and immediately suggests that any imbalance between them must be due to some structural force that has to be changed through the force of government. That's as simple as I can make it. And by the way, there is a difference between liberal and leftist, right? The reason I use left and not liberal, you'll notice, I never use the word liberal. The reason is because I don't think that the old style liberal, I think they're on the wane. I think the old style liberals were people who believed in more government intervention in the economy than I do, but still believed in basic principles of free speech. And I think that the modern left has decided to discard all of that in favor of this equality of outcome brought about by tremendous use of government force.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for being here. I'm a senior here at the U of R, and I'm a Republican, a conservative, but there are a lot of things that you say that definitely some people think come across as abrasive. And there are things that I wouldn't say.
Yeah, talk to my wife, yeah.
Sure. But there are a lot of things that you say that I wouldn't say, even though we share a lot of viewpoints.
Yeah.
And for me, actually, a part of that has to do with the fact that I do care about the feelings of people around me. And there are some things that even if I take them as sort of factual, I don't necessarily see them as beneficial to put other people down.
Okay.
So
that's fair.
Yeah. So not sure if you got Speaker Ryan's speech to the congressional interns last week about civility in public discourse.
I hated it, as you might imagine.
I love it. So my question is, that speech was centered around, getting things done and kind of both the right and the left, or Republicans and Democrats, speaking at a level where they can find common ground.
Right.
So in your view, at what point does your abrasiveness or the things that you're willing to say get in the way of productivity? Do you ever feel that, because in my view, rhetoric matters.
Right.
So
I agree.
Do you think that there are instances where the things that you say maybe don't benefit, the values that they don't help us get things done?
I mean, I hope not, but that's a subjective decision. Obviously, if I didn't think I was doing a good job, I would change. So the reason that I use abrasive rhetoric sometimes, and particularly with regard to what I perceive to be moral issues, is because the greatest barrier to people coming to any sort of consensus is this barrier of under moral superiority. There's a whole group of people, and if you're on college campus, you know this, where if you say you're a Republican or a conservative, the first thing they say to you is you must be a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe, right? You must be a bad person. There is no good response to that comes from an efficiency or policy wrong side. There is no good response to that, right? If someone calls you a racist, you can't come back with, but the measures that you're proposing are counterproductive, right? They just don't work economically. They result in lower GDP. Right? This is not an effective response. So most of the places where I'm most abrasive tend to be places where the left feels an unearned moral superiority, and my goal there is to strip them of that feeling. And then we have mutually assured destruction. We can do character attacks all day, or we can move to what works and what doesn't work. Right? So the idea is that you have to speak in moral language. This is why when I speak in terms of socialism versus capitalism, I haven't even talked about socialism is a failed experiment everywhere that it's tried. Right? Instead, what I talk about typically is the morality of socialism is actually immoral. It is government-subsidized theft. Right? And the reason that I do that, and that's more abrasive, it's a more abrasive way of putting it. The reason that I say that is because people tend to understand moral arguments more easily than they understand policy arguments, and more importantly, we need to get beyond the point where we're just insulting each other. So the problem is one side's insulting, and the other side is coming back with efficiency, utilitarian metrics. You're not going to even be able to have a conversation. Because if someone calls you a racist and your immediate response is, well, that's, you're a reasonable person, let's have a conversation about that, then you've already lost the argument. You're already considered a racist. Because you're saying a reasonable person called you a racist, therefore it's reasonable to think that maybe you're a racist. The proper response to you're a racist is, no, you're an asshole. Right? And that's... that's abrasive, but so is being called a racist. So my general rule of politics is, as President Obama's administration likes to say, to punch back twice as hard. I'll meet you on the level in which you want to have the conversation. If you want to engage in a respectful conversation about terminology and how we reach the best solutions, that's one thing. If you just want to throw out conversation enders, right, like white privilege, which is a conversation ender, if you just want to throw that out, then I'm not going to engage in a policy debate with you, because I know that at the end of that policy debate, you're just going to say that I'm ensconced in my white privilege anyway and therefore a racist. Which is, so it's useless. I'm not going to engage in circular arguments. So abrasiveness, in other words, is a tool. It's a means, it's not an end. Okay, great, thank you so much, I appreciate it.